Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We talk about local news, state news, and sometimes look at the national news to make good decisions and give you guys insights about how to think about what's going on in this lovely city, the 13th largest city in America that's about to hit 1 million people. We got a lot to talk about today, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to last week's pod, that was an awesome one. Probably one of my favorite episodes that we did, and that was with Crystal Gaydon, the chair of the Democratic Party. After having that out for a week, what was your take on it?
I think it was a great episode. These things fall out of my brain pretty quickly, EJ. Yeah. So when you ask me on the cut, off the fly, like, what did I think of something, and I haven't thought about what my thoughts are, I sometimes struggle to recall. But I know I went to a panel discussion that the Fort Worth Report had this past week. They had one for Republican candidates and one for Democratic candidates. And I had a friend's birthday celebration happening at the same night as the Republican one. So I didn't get to attend it in person, but I did listen to the live stream that they did on Facebook.
Based off the live stream, the Republican debate looked a little bit more fun than probably the party,
Oh, the birthday party you're talking about. Yes. It was interesting. I was texting you immediately after the introductions of like the first three candidates saying, oh, my head is going to explode. But I did attend the Democratic panel in person, and that was also live streamed. And I think both of those are still available for folks to go and look up. So
we'll put those in the show notes. We're not going to be talking about that today.
Right. And we also were going to share with folks, just because those things are going on and we are about to enter into early voting. And because almost all the things that we talk about are kind of educating people to be informed citizens so that they can be engaged, we did just want to briefly touch on that early voting in the primary, which is March 5th. Early voting starts February 20th and goes through March 1st with the primary election happening on March 5th. And the last day to apply for a ballot by mail is February 23rd. And I sent you the link to Tarrant County's election information so that folks can go get all those questions answered.
Here's what's great about Ann. She listens to the Democratic chair's interview, and she automatically implements and says, you know what, I'm going to get more involved, and was there at the Democratic debates. And
they weren't really debates. These were panel discussions.
And so I just love that, that she actually takes her time and energy to implement and get more involved, especially when we have these guests on. And so that's really cool. And also, the reason why primaries are so important is because usually the people who go to primaries are people who are super, into politics, and they have very strong views that maybe not align with the average Fort Worthian. Or you also see that when people do it in Iowa or people do it in Nevada. And so at the end of the day, it's important for you to also make sure that you're going out there to pick the person you think best represents your thoughts, because if not, usually
somebody else is picking.
Yeah, and it's usually the further extremes of each candidate, and then we're mad at that we get the options that we do when you decide to vote only in the main election.
Yeah, and I think one of the takeaways I had with the episode last week was why more people don't vote. And when you start looking at what it takes to be an informed voter, it's not easy.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
If you just go off of the mailers that show up in your mailbox, you're definitely getting a skewed view. If you just go off of, what's in the news, that's a skewed view. So where do people go? And so I can see that could lead to people just being intimidated by it all and throwing up their hands and being like, I don't really know, so I'm just not going to.
Yeah.
And so I think what we try to do is provide some resources and places where people can go get these questions answered so that they feel informed enough to make an informed decision.
Yeah.
And are not intimidated by the process to the point where they don't.
Yeah. And we know this podcast is not easy to listen to. I mean, we get into the weeds. Like you guys know, we're going to give you 3 short stories. We're going to give you a big story, and we're going to give you wins and losses every week. And the tough thing about it is doing the harder things longer is usually a good outtake for like performing as a person. And I think that's what motivates me to do this with you every week, even though it is hard in our schedules to figure out. Me and you we spend more time thinking about what we're going to say, what we're going to talk about, than the 1 hour we produce for you guys. You all are going to go watch the Super Bowl tonight while I'm editing this, watching the Super Bowl night, eating chicken wings because I have to edit the podcast. And I don't want buffalo sauce all over my hands while I'm on my computer. So you guys are going to enjoy all that stuff while we work on giving this information to you guys because we think it's that important. And so thank you for all of you being here to also see that this is important. So it's important to know that our big story will be about all the it will be our takeaways of what we can see at the state level. We think what's going on at the state level needs to be discussed. We are not experts on the state level. We are not invested in our reading energy at the state level, but we just pulled some articles. We're going to give you some overview takeaways and really why you need to start being involved in your primary elections as a Texas citizen, and then also talking about just kind of getting ready to vote for 2024. So let's start with short story number 1. And do you want to bring us in?
Sure. So short story number 1 is a Fort Worth Star-Telegram article entitled Tarrant to Look at Terminating Contract After State Finds Private Jail Out of Compliance. And one of the reasons that we're circling back and sharing this is because this topic came up on a panel that we both attended that Commissioner Simmons hosted, where this contract with an out of local area private jail was questioned on that panel, and come to find out that the private prison near Lubbock, after the Commission on Jail Standards found it to be out of compliance in 6 areas. So the county has spent $40 million for 500 beds at this correctional institution, and the prison is owned by Utah-based Management and Training Corp. So Judge O'Hara and the commissioners had never been notified of a December report that called the violations found by the state inspector simply unacceptable. And Commissioner Simmons, who had that panel recently, said she did not learn of the violations until she was asked about them by reporters. So the state inspector found that the medical treatment lacking for inmates, insufficient training, and failure to check on inmates in a timely manner among some of the violations. But there were 6 violations, and so now Tarrant County is circling back. The commissioners voted unanimously on Tuesday to explore terminating the contract with this private prison due to these incompliances that they found in 6 areas.
Something that I just want to give kudos to is Commissioner Simmons did not know this until asked about it by reporters. This just wants to highlight why local journalism is so important, because sometimes they're making situations even aware to the people in power
that are making those policy decisions.
Yes. And so without local journalists doing their work, I don't know if you get to this outcome, which is something that we're all passionate about. And that is, we shouldn't have shipping Tarrant County citizens to a for-profit prison, and we're spending 10 to 20% of our overall budget in county, when you look at the police budget and the safety, on this for-profit prison. And so that is one, I think, why I'm so passionate about us supporting local journalism.
They also mentioned several people that had been coming to the commissioner's court to raise these concerns and asking questions about it, which is probably what kind of put reporters on to digging in deeper as well. So
citizen journalism is great as well.
Yeah. And I think those public comments, sometimes people poo-poo folks that show up and speak in the public comments at various groups like city council and county commissioners. But, as someone who has sat before people in those public comments and listened to public comment, even sometimes when people seem to be maybe a little off the rails or hyper-focused on something that you think they might be too hyper-focused on, almost regularly, very regularly, individuals come up with things that definitely need to be addressed, even if some people are, not paying attention while these public comments are happening. So I think it's important to always listen to pretty much anybody that takes the time to come and voice an opinion about things.
Simmons, who has opposed the contract, voiced her displeasure in a statement. In a light of these developments, I want to reiterate my opposition to this contract and make it unequivocally clear that I am against extending it beyond its expiration date. She hosted and facilitated that panel, and to see that we're able to get this passed or like get this on the docket where it seems that we're now as a county office agreeing and seeing on the same page, it is a positive step that I feel like we've been looking for in county news. And so that is a bonus.
Yeah. I think once you listen to the facts and not kind of dig in on a partisan position, people can come to an agreement that things need to change.
Speaking of change in the county area, we have our second story, which is about the director of the Tarrant County Public Health Department resigning. Vinny Taneja, director of Tarrant County Public Health Department, resigned Tuesday. Taneja led the health department since 2014. Deputy County Administrator Tom Stallings will serve as the acting director of the department in Taneja's absence, and a search will begin immediately for his replacement, according to the news release. The release, which was 3 sentences long, did not provide details surrounding Taneja's decision to resign. Taneja's management of the department was reviewed by the County Human Resource Department in 2022 after departing employee reported pervasive and persistent bullying and a toxic work environment. I know when you were in council, you mentioned that you've had a couple conversations or seen him present at different events. What is your overall take, what you're seeing here? Why should people know?
I mean, as the county health department administrator, he did come to city council multiple times to give presentations on various things. I think that upticked significantly during COVID. And I always found him to be a very professional person. He was definitely taking COVID seriously. He came to Rotary as well and did a presentation kind of after the height of COVID. And was still very much taking precautions seriously. And, I haven't read the report that was done, and I don't want to be dismissive of what people might have said in a human resources in-depth dive to employees that were there. So literally my experience is anecdotal and minimal, but I found him to be very responsible and doing a good job.
I think the reason why this is important to me is because you're constantly seeing people fall out of important things that Tarrant County does. Like one thing Tarrant County should really prioritize is information and communicating tough languages around health to its constituents. Part of his role was to take science and talk about what was going on, and especially at a time with COVID, and talking about it in a way that was simple for people. We can debate how well we did with that, but at the end of the day, like the fact that there's a gap there. We also then lost Hyder Garcia, who was in charge of Tarrant County's elections, and so it's like, to me, it's just another person gone, but it's also someone who's gone that isn't in the same political framework as Tim O'Hare, Wayburn, Manny Ramirez. I'm not saying that they're Democrats or they're hyper progressives, but you can just tell that they maybe aren't as extreme or.
Well, they're literally not bringing politics into doing their job.
But you can context clues, like his last job was from Michigan. You could context, most science professionals and people, and the number one dictator of being a Democrat are a college degree, bachelor's of science, increases that. So at the end of the day, I just feel like I understand the staffing thing is something that needs to be looked into. But also I am just afraid of continuing when people who are different than Tim O'Hare ends up leaving power in the county, especially now when you look at the election chief and now the public health. Two things that the average people don't understand how it works, and you need clear leadership to make sure we communicate and all be on the same path.
And I think that report they did in 2022 indicated that there was nothing illegal had happened, and so it was documenting the complaints, and I would assume making sure that they were addressed, but I don't think it was saying that he should be fired by any stretch of the imagination. So his choice to resign may have been due to some of the things that you just described. I know that county health used to be part of the city. Like the city used to have a public health department, and that was right where the Brit is located by the Botanic Gardens. That was a big county health building or city health building right there. And that decision was made years ago. And there was some conversation during COVID about whether or not the city should still have a stronger hand in all of that. And I think the city did take a stronger hand in all of that, because I think the mayor stepped up and worked kind of hand in hand alongside the county commissioners and the county judge, who was Judge Whitley at that time, to address the concerns about COVID. But it was definitely as they say here, working 24/7 burnout during the COVID pandemic. It was a very challenging time to be in any of those seats and making any of those decisions.
Commissioner Manny Ramirez did say, I think there's a few core responsibilities that a county is responsible for, and one of them is public health. And so I think that we've got to double down and make sure that we truly do have a world-class public health agency that is responsive to the needs of not just the existing public health threats out there, but what could be emerging. We're going to move into story number 3, short story number 3, which is an Zeta special on an update. We had a big conference here around transportation in the city, and I think there's some updates that we all just got to think about as we continue to grow.
Yeah, we started this with one article, which was a Fort Worth Report article about Tarrant County having a summit recently. As Tarrant County population surges, transportation experts discuss economic impact of region's next steps. So this is a transportation summit that has been held yearly for the last 14 years, and it has been led by an effort to one of the county commissioners who's actually not running again. We'll see who takes up the mantle to continue with this transportation summit. But Commissioner Fickus has been the person who's brought this transportation summit together each year. And this year, I didn't actually attend in person, but several people I know did. And I read this article that talks about accelerating the interests of Tarrant County's transportation needs. And they discussed this at this February 9th summit, that solid transportation infrastructure needs to respond to the growth that we've been having. And they talked about long-range planning, planning for closer to 1 million residents. They had some folks from the city who chimed in on this and talked about how Fort Worth is working on its first master transportation plan. I think we've had a master thoroughfare plan, but this master transportation plan is broadening the look beyond just the thoroughfares and also kind of looking at land use around those thoroughfares, which I think is a good thing. And the city spokesperson mentioned that Fort Worth needs to look at all modes of transportation and have a long-range plan in place. And then they talk about some of the growth areas of where people are trying to go and how many people are trying to go these places. And so this all is, putting stress on. And then areas where development might occur. So west of Fort Worth, where Rivian was possibly going to locate. And one of the things was not having maybe all of the infrastructure in place to support that. And so wanting to make sure that infrastructure is in place to support that. But as the city continues to grow and economic development folks are looking of where people can go, they need to tackle this population surge in the north and in the west. And so the article goes into all this detail and then speaks to diversifying mobility options, and they touch on high-speed rail, and then they go straight into talking about how we have managed lanes and how we've added managed lanes to highways. And so my takeaway from all of this, when I read this article, is that we're just saying the same things over and over and over again. And one thing that just doesn't seem to be sinking in is the concept of induced demand. That literally adding lanes, regardless of whether they're managed or free lanes, is just going to induce more people to drive. And not half the time, I don't even know for sure how much of the time, but many times those lanes fill up and become just as congested as the roads were before those lanes were added, before the project is even completed. So I found that to be incredibly frustrating. I mean, I'm glad that they touch on multimodal and all of that, but I just feel like there's a lot of saying we should do these things, and then all we talk about are the roads that we're building. So in the meantime of looking at that article, you also sent me a NBC DFW 5 story that is titled Dallas Fort Worth drivers spend almost 2 hours extra in rush hour last year. And this is basically saying how much extra time you're spending on the road to get 6 miles in a metro area because of congestion. And I don't know, and I think it's also because the way we're developing, which we continually talk on. And I know when we started listing off all these articles, I was like, this could be the big story again, EJ. And you're like, we're not talking about transportation for the big story again. But talking about what rush hour is and how many minutes that's adding to your commute and all of that is another little article that popped up in all of this.
I mean, what's crazy about the transportation thing is I didn't really realize how to operate without cars because I grew up in Texas. But after spending a month in Japan and just seeing how much easier it is to have like a community guided infrastructure that's focused on people and community rather than cars and construction, it is so refreshing because the last 2 weekends I actually have had to drive to Dallas. I drive to the Mavericks game and then I drive to a concert. And the roads and just how we drive and data shows that car accidents and car deaths are constantly a high reason why someone dies that's under 35 years old. And when you have thousands of people dying a year because of car accidents, car crashes, let's be clear, it's a lot higher than how many people die because of immigration. And it's another Texas thing that I just feel like there's so much investments on trucks, the business of concrete, the business of construction. And it's also why housing has become the way it is, which we'll talk more about later. And so, I don't know, we have just built a place that everyone wants their individual freedom in Texas. And they will choose to live in their big house and their big cars and drive around and have no friends and listen to YouTube. And that is a sad Texas that we live in.
There was another article that somebody shared earlier this week about a transit-oriented development that's being built at the T&P station right there off of Vickery on the edge of downtown. And one of the very first comments that somebody shared was, oh, they're building that on top of a parking lot. Where are people going to park? And so my answer was, clearly there's going to be parking as structured parking built into this development, which is better use of land next to a transit station for sure. But wouldn't it be refreshing if we were putting just as much energy in supporting a transit system that gets you to the train without having to drive your car to the train and needing a place to park? Exactly. And in the area that this person lives, there is a zip zone. So literally the options are better than most of the other parts of the city. So people constantly go back to, they don't want to subsidize public transportation without recognizing how subsidized driving your own individual car is, parking your own individual car is. This incessant insistence on having free parking everywhere, people don't realize it's not free. They're paying for it in other ways. And even if they never go to that place where the free parking is, they're paying for that free parking because they're getting, charged other things that then go to pay for that parking that is offered for free to the people who go to that place.
A car cost and a car expense is just a big bearing, a big burden on us as Americans. And when you look at Americans today, you have to buy a house that's overpriced. You then have to have over, $40,000 in college debt, regardless if you graduated. And then you have childcare. And then you're paying all this money for a gas guzzler that is the people in Tokyo do not have that, or even people who do have cars, they're very small cars to get around very minimal places because it's not needed to go 85 miles an hour because you have to get across, to get it to a concert because Fort Worth or Frisco or Prosper is too small to have all the amenities that you want.
So you got to go elsewhere for them.
Yeah, and so it's so expensive to live here because of the transportation costs, because of the housing costs, and then you don't, we didn't even talk about health insurance. You don't even get health insurance. Just sure, there's jobs, high paying jobs here, but then they all take your money anyways because Texas
They're not
isn't providing you
offering up any
anything.
of that
You're
stuff.
not getting public health. You're not getting public transportation. You're not getting any community. And I want to continue to believe that Texas is creating an isolated culture where we all live in our homes, we all drive our cars, and we all do not talk to each other, and we Uber eat, because being isolated and allowing us to live on our phones and our realities allows us to never come together to see all the crazy stuff that's happening across the state of Texas.
I think the title of this episode is going to be something about ranting.
Yeah.
EJ and Ann ranting about all of the things.
Yeah, it's we had an interview the last two weeks, so we had to get it all out
Had
this
some
episode.
pent up.
Yeah.
Some pent up ranting.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and move into state politics, which will be the big story. We haven't figured out what the big story title will be, but maybe it's something around ranting about Texas and what's going on in the state. So we have 5. Surely, anytime I talk to someone, anyone, if it's a part of our staff, if it's aunts and uncles who live somewhere else, if it's friends here in Texas, everyone is talking about Texas, it feels right now. They're talking about the border. They're talking about immigration. They're talking about the immigration bill that just got declined, the border bill. Now you're talking about what's going on at the state level with vouchers. And Texas is just doing a lot right now at the state level. And so I know how we focus on city, but the city seems just a lot more quiet. And unless you want Ann to talk about transportation more
Every single week,
and to talk about growth, then we are going to have to take a step into the the state situation. But let's be clear, we do not invest a lot of our times in state news. But we have done some today to kind of start the conversation and give you some takeaways. We recommend you read it. We are going to rant our perspective and thoughts about these situations because I believe you listen to this because you think we are relatively thoughtful on how we think about how we operate our system of beliefs to exist in this society. And so you also pay with time to hear us rant if you're listening now. And so we will do some of that while also giving you our best updates of what's going on at the state of Texas.
And some really in-depth articles that you can read and dive into more deeply than maybe we will, line by line by line, like we sometimes do when we're sharing articles and short stories.
We have 5 to 6 articles up.
I only have 3 of them up, so I'm going to respond. EJ's going to have the bulk of these. So the first one that we have pulled up is Texas GOP leaders reverse course, ban anti-Semites from party. And so I don't know if we touched on this on the pod or if you all were paying attention when a while back the Texas Democratic Party Executive Committee were voting on a resolution that was basically saying, we don't want to have people who are expressing anti-Semitic views supporting our party, being a part of our party, meeting with our party, having influence on our decisions. But that first resolution that they talked about passing did not pass. So they've revisited that. And so they've come back with a resolution stating that the party will not associate with anti-Semites, a reversal from December when a similar measure was narrowly and controversially defeated following an outcry over a major donor group's ties to white supremacy. So this new resolution, the first resolution was very pointed, very specific, mentioned people and incidences by name, is my understanding. And subsequently, they've come back around and have come forward and passed this resolution, which I think the article describes it as being a little bit watered down.
And why this is also important because, the Texas Tribune reported that Jonathan Strickland, then the leader of the Defend Texas Liberty, had hosted the infamous white supremacist Nick Fuentes, who's an admirer of Adolf Hitler, for nearly 7 hours. And that was in early October here in Tarrant County. And if you remember us going through also with Tarrant for Change when we had an interview with them, we really talked about how Tarrant County is at the epicenter of anti-Semitism and extremism views, if it's white nationalist views, all these things somehow come across into Tarrant County politics. So it's become big enough, though, where now you're seeing Phelan and 60 other Republicans calling on the party members to redirect any funds from the Defend Texas Liberty to pro-Israel charities, demands that were initially rebuffed by some. Republicans, including Lieutenant Dan Patrick, later announced that he was reinvesting the $3 million he received from Defend Texas Liberty into Israeli bonds. So let's be clear, they're still accepting the money from people who are supporting anti-Semitism, and they're saying they're doing that okay by now they're just going to put it in some bonds that are based in Israel's economy, I guess. So I think the other part here, to kind of give you context here, there's a lot of simple infighting happening in Texas, and maybe we can have an expert or someone who's really been following the Texas Senate kind of just drama. It almost feels like, for me, like a Spanish novela. Like, it is just so much going on. You got people are mad at Dade Phelan because he tried to remove Paxton. They're upset because Paxton's upset because he's trying to now get Phelan out. So now he's silencing Phelan. And then you have Abbott upset because Phelan's not allowing the vouchers. And Dan Patrick's upset because of the immigration stuff at the federal government with Biden. And so there's just a lot of infighting going on within Texas that is just keeping it very entertaining, to say the least.
Yeah, I think this article wraps up with the fact that they also had a separate vote where they voted 55-4 to censure Phelan over, among other things, his role in the impeachment of General Paxton, his appointment of Democrats to chair House committees, and for allegedly allowing a bill on border security to die in May. So what jumped out at me on this was his appointment of Democrats to chair House committees, which is just amazing to me. People who think that you get elected with one party and then you just try to block out any influence or any say or any leadership of the other party, because that's just so the antithesis of anything that I believe. Yeah. And so that jumped out at me. But Phelan's spokesperson did respond, saying that this is just the executive committee's previous failure to ban anti-Semitism within the party and a delayed response from the scandal last year, and that this is same organization that rolled out the red carpet for neo-Nazis refusing to disassociate from the anti-Semitic groups and balked at the formal condemnation of a known sex predator before he was ousted from the House. The executive committee has lost its moral authority and is no longer representative of the views of the party as a whole. So I thought that was an interesting wrap up.
At the end of the day, like, I think the Dade Phelan kind of Republican is where we got to get back to in Texas. And I know people who are probably listening to this pod who are super progressive, or to me, it's like, I feel like my views and beliefs are very progressive, but when you live in Texas and you got to think about today, like that, I'm thankful that there's a Dade Phelan fighting for sanity right now, even though probably 80% of the stuff that he believes and I believe are opposites. And I know a lot of people who probably listen to this, they're still giving their money to Israel, and that's a situation. But at the end of the day, like, we have to today focus on, like, how do you keep some type of sanity where there's somebody in leadership in Texas that then can make sure that everyone gets a voice, everyone gets heard, and we can come together, agree, disagree, elect officials from the other side, and come back to a more prosperous Texas.
Collaboration and consensus building. Yeah. It just feels like if you refuse to do that, then you're not going to be able to get anywhere in Texas. But it does sometimes feel worrisome that if only people on the more progressive side are willing to do that and look at people, quote unquote, on the other side as being more rational and someone I could work with, kind of thing, and folks on the other side who are in those seats of control and power refuse to hear anything from the opposite side, again, quote unquote, then do you continue to lose ground? But you don't want to be pulled into a situation where you're doing the bad, horrible things that you think the other side is doing because you don't see another path. And then you're doing just as bad of the things that we're upset about they're doing.
The other article we're now going into, the big conversation was the U.S. border bill. Texas Democrats and Republicans split on border proposal, not necessarily on party lines. A sweeping bipartisan deal meant to dramatically curb an influx of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border has become the latest flashpoint among Texans in and around Congress, but it's not on party lines. Democrat candidate U.S. Rep. Colin Aldred said he is receptive to the $118 billion deal, but Senator Ted Cruz and Democratic State Senator Roland Gutierrez both recoiled at the proposal. Cruz criticism echoed other Republicans in the Texas delegation as they began to understand the proposal in the 370-page bill. Meanwhile, Gutierrez mirrored progressives' outrage that deal that doesn't go far enough to protect migrants. And I think that what we were just talking about, I think, is perfect because it's literally going on again here, where you have Colin Aldridge, who's trying to be electable, and in a very tough state, but also seems to be more moderate. And then you have Roland Gutierrez, which I believe was the mayor of Uvalde.
I believe he was the mayor of Uvalde, and so both of them are running against Ted Cruz right now. So they're both Democratic candidates for Senator Cruz's seat. The legislation was the result of months of negotiations between Democrats and Senate Republicans. The proposal was brokered in part by lawmakers who also wanted to pass aid money for U.S. allies. Republicans made that legislative priority conditional on a comprehensive border reform, and the White House endorsed the package, highlighting the importance of continued support for Ukraine and Israel, and the National Border Patrol Council and the Border Patrol Union, that is often critical of Democratic border packages, also backed the package as being far better than the current status quo. So it seemed like a group of people came together, and if you read through this article further, there's some folks upset about who was at the table and who wasn't at the table, and then some people saying that some groups were against it before they even had a chance to read it. And so again, it's that whole, are we willing to work together and fully read something and determine whether we can come together in consensus and collaboration, or are we just digging in our heels and being like, that's the other side, giving too much to the other side?
Yeah, the package will expedite asylum screening, expand detention capacity, and require the administration to shut down the border if too many migrants cross illegally. So, so here's comes an EJ rant. I will probably say I politically align a lot more to Mr. Gutierrez. However, I am also aware that we are in a crisis where the Republican Party is using immigration as the thing that Biden is doing poorly in, and it's being the thing that they can hold on to because the economy is doing really well. And so you have people needing to, Biden has to act tough on immigration right now to save an election, to be able to compete against Trump. Trump wanted the Republicans to cancel that bill because that's what he's riding on, because you can't ride on the economy, which is usually enough here in Texas. But yet, when you look at Biden's economy, statistically, it's doing even better than what you all enjoyed with Reagan in 1984, right? In 1984, inflation ran at 4.3%. In 2023, it was 3.4%. In 1984, 7.5% unemployment. 2023, less than 3.6%. Interest rates were at 10%. Interest rates today are 5.3%. The S&P 500 only returned 1.4%. And then 17.3% in 1983, but in 2023, the economy, this S&P 500 returned 24% in 2023. So you can't go against him on the economy, and so we're currently in a situation where the immigration. So now he's had to make a lot of things, and I know there's people who are very strong on fighting for migrant rights, immigration. I have very progressive views on how we should operate on immigration, but today, my number one priority is that we have a leader in office who believes in democracy. And so because of that, I have to ride with Joe Biden as the candidate to do so. And so if he's now having to make cases, which I don't agree with, on immigration, get that passed so that we can do something and have a solution. And that's why the Republicans canceled it. This is my interpretation of how I see what happens when you have to have a realism approach to what's going on right now, regardless what your views are. And so I think that's also happening in Texas. And I just hate to see Texas Democrats or Texas progressives start infighting as well, because this is the time for us to really come together, really focus in while they're infighting at the state level.
So I think what is interesting about this article, they're talking about border issues, and what you just pointed out, that's a hot button issue going into a presidential election that clearly some folks don't want to be resolved before that election, because it's the thing that they can point to criticize the Democratic administration that's currently in power. But that also kind of leads into another article that we have with the Texas Tribune as well, called Border Security Overpowers School Vouchers and Paxton Impeachment in the Texas House Primaries. So literally, people are running on border issues because in polling, they are recognizing that this whole voucher conversation is not what is important to the electorate. And so I think you pointed out that there's a little bit of shenanigans going on here in what Governor Abbott is supporting, and the candidates that he's backing are candidates that agree with him on these border issues, but they also have a position on vouchers, but they're not talking about the voucher issue.
Yeah.
So
he's trying. So based off the article, he's endorsing and inviting people to the border, but to show that these people are strong on immigration, which if you really look at all the candidates, the people he's touting against, one of them were even quoted saying Biden's trying to give your public dollars to immigrants with his voucher bill. So it's like they're not even fighting. They all have the same on immigration, but Abbott is picking the winners so that when he can now slide in the voucher conversation after the election. And so to me, one, that dude's a mastermind like that. And that's why we're in the place we're in today. But I just think that's also something we should be aware about, is they're using this immigration because this is all they have. The reason why they're so desperate about immigration, because they can't use the economy. They're not going to be able to run on their little voucher idea. And even on energy, Biden has issued out more oil and gas permits than Donald Trump. He actually has done more than any other president in lifetime. So it's and all this is right here. I will give you the notes of the scale of graph of how much we're drilling here in the United States. The reason why you don't hear about it is because he also did the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, which 80% of those are going to red states. So you can't talk about energy. You can't talk about manufacturing. He is literally giving us everything else that they usually run when they run against a Democrat. So they're just desperate on this immigration stuff. And I think it's a shame that it has led to where we are, where now where you have people coming to the border from Tennessee, Kentucky to fight in a war against our border patrol. The people who their job is to protect and do the things that you want them to do. And now they're more worried about people coming from out of nowhere to go in war with them because they now want to protect it on their own and think that a
that the
grassroots
people
militia
who are supposed to be doing it are not doing a good enough job.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as far as what's important to primary voters, the University of Houston poll released Tuesday found that Republican primary voters support tax-funded school vouchers to all parents 64 to 29. But when it comes to empowering state authorities to arrest undocumented immigrants, a new Texas law, they support widening gap of 89% to 9%. So clearly, they see in these polls that this is what is the hot button triggery issue for folks. And so they're going to talk about it as much as they can.
Yeah. And this is why, unfortunately, I think Biden has a lot going against him to be liked. But he needs to hit on the economic abundance, the energy abundance. And I just get frustrated because I think if he responded they want you to close the border, but border being open is so important to the economy. You ever see when we talk about closing down the border and it's like, oh, we have wasted billions of dollars of resources because they couldn't get through and everything is spoiled sitting on the roads.
All those trucks are lined up trying to come through.
So it's like,
with all the things that we've ordered on Amazon.
Yeah, right. And so it's just like, I feel like the other conversation they need to hit on is, rather than being reactive about like, I'm doing bad at immigration, it's saying how impacting this is to the economy, and an economy that is booming and being successful. So yeah, I think that was just another big piece. The final article, and then we're going to move in the last state story that I think is interesting, is I'm going to copy a Economist article talking about how to detoxify the politics of migration. And I just saw this interesting stat that I just thought it would be a great way to wrap this up. The vast majority of people who migrate do so voluntarily and without drama. For all the talk of record numbers and unprecedented crisis, the share of the world's people who live outside of their country of birth is just 3.6%. It has barely changed since 1960, when it was 3.1%. So I know when you live on an island, you deal with tsunamis. When you live on a border, you deal with a situation. And I know that's a hard thing that we have to and we have to support our citizens who do live in America and do live on the border. But we have to scope out and see how it's not as intense as they want us to make it feel, because they ain't got anything else to go against what's going on the last 4 years in America.
And interestingly enough, the final article that you just kind of briefly mentioned is also talking about borders, but not borders between countries, but borders between states.
Lord Jesus.
So Texas conservatives test how far they can extend abortion and gender transition restrictions beyond state lines. So I guess a lot of this was brought up when abortion laws were discussed, and how after Roe was overturned, it's sending it back to the states as to what can happen where. But in Texas, we're not just talking about what can happen in Texas, apparently. We're talking about reaching across state lines and asking for medical information on people who have gone to other states in order to access care that they and their doctors determine that they need.
Yeah, and so this is like, right, Paxton's been a bully for a hot minute trying to stop this. And you also talked about the county roads who are trying to limit people to drive on roads if they're trying to drive across states to get an abortion. And so what I really loved about this article, and why I think we saved it for last, is because the states and how we work together is starting to be fragmented again. I mean, the idea is that we were one union who all kind of believed in the same stuff. We all kind of had some basic state policies. But I think one of the biggest responses to why states are where they are today, where you have some states that are pro-marijuana and you have some states that are not. And you have people driving to states to get marijuana. You have people having to drive back. You have people driving to go get abortions because their state doesn't allow for abortions. And so there's just a lot of fragmentation among states. So it's not even just, like you said, the Mexico-Texas border that's creating a lot of drama in-house. It's the borders between other states. And the article, which shout out to Kermit Roosevelt, a law professor at Penn Cary Law at the University of Pennsylvania, said, this is her quote, or their quote, "Slavery is probably the best historical parallel to what we're seeing now. Obviously, that didn't end well. Well, it did because we abolished slavery federally, but it was a tough road." And so it really kind of dives into how in the 1800s, at some states abolished slavery and others clung to it more tightly. Free states began passing personal liberty laws, saying they would not cooperate with the efforts to return escaped enslaved people to their enslavers. States had very different policies on lots of different stuff, but they tend to just keep those politics within their own borders. What's unusual here is what was unusual about slavery, and that states were extending their own policies or trying to enforce their own policies in states that didn't agree with them. And I just thought that was just like a great example. I mean, definitely different topics and different situations. And a lot of them are hard in different ways. But you're talking about women's rights to their bodies. And then you're talking slavery, where you actually have a right to be
the right to
person
somebody
and
else's
be free
body.
yeah. And so it's just like, I don't know. I guess that's just like, we had to talk about state politics today because it's just a talk of town and we're navigating it. But we just want you all to be mindful and just really don't get discouraged on all this talk.
I would agree with that. I think the recent efforts, as they talk about in this article, are scrutinizing what Texans do out of state. And I think it's really important the question they ask, how far does Texas authority go to control people out when they are in other states? And, growing up, I grew up in the state that I was born in. I never planned to leave that state. And the things that played into a decision about where I might live in the United States, and as I said earlier, when we were just touching on these articles and determining what we were going to talk about, it feels like it's not the United States of America anymore with all of this fracturing going on, with all of this stuff. And it gives a lot more different topics that one needs to take into consideration when making decisions about where they're going to live. But as you said, like 3% of the population lives outside of the country that they were born in. So how many people are actually moving around the state as well? In the past, it might be based on, amenities that state has, weather that state has, whether you have family that lives in that state. My husband made huge decisions about where to live based on weather. He grew up in Michigan. It was freezing cold. He did not want to continue to live that way. He moved to Texas. I think it's a little hot here. Yeah. But, it's not just weather that we're making these decisions on anymore. These are much more serious questions that people have to take into consideration if we continue down this path. Yeah.
So that is the big story, guys. We'd love your input takes. You can DM us on social media or whatever you feel to express to us how you feel about this. Because we know we don't talk about state politics a lot, but we just felt like it was more important than anything going on locally. I'm actually glad that Fort Worth's out of the news right now and we can just continue to live together. But we do have wins and losses, and I actually like a lot of these.
So my loss is something that you sent me, I think, just earlier today. But it says, welcome to DFFW, why a North Texas realtor says the Metro's future is Frisco. And you seem to think this too, because you're constantly talking about Frisco and what they've got going on in Frisco. I think this is complete nonsense, but the reason that I was drawn to the article is I not only read the article, but also watched the WFAA interview where the newscaster was speaking to this realtor who was describing these neighborhoods that are so attractive to people. And they're standing in front of a row of homes that are model homes for a builder, where he says, isn't this amazing? You can come to this one location and look at 5 model homes and get them all knocked out in a short order. But he also goes on to talk about how there are houses that were built in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that are no longer desirable because people want a new home. And then he references places like Dallas, where there are 100-year-old homes, which he admits readily will always have a demand. And I'm sitting there thinking, do you realize that you're selling people a home that is not going to increase in value probably, and will become one of those houses from the 70s, 80s, and 90s maybe that are not as desirable because there's always some new thing being built, maybe just a little bit further out. So I just found this frustrating because I know people sometimes get attracted by the shiny new thing and they don't think about those other costs that you were rattling off earlier in this pod about the cost of car, a cost of time on the road, the cost of not having the amenities. And they do describe some very fancy amenity centers in these new developments that are being built. And maybe some people, this is attractive to them, but the idea of having a bunch of single family homes and a amenity center with a coffee shop and a swimming pool, and that's it. And you have to drive for your groceries and you have to, all these things. That's just so not attractive to me. So that's my loss.
The reason why I'm so, I'm at the end of the day, I just see the data, right? Like Frisco's growing really fast. Frisco's investing in entrepreneurship more than Fort Worth. Frisco is booming. You got Prosper now. You got Salina. You got all the amenities that are happening over in Frisco. And I'm just looking at consumer behavior that Frisco is really interesting because I think what it's going to be is a trailblazing example of what does life look like post skyscrapers. We're living in a crisis of what's the point of skyscrapers today, besides looking really cool and feeling like you're in a city, because people aren't going to work downtown anymore. People aren't doing those things. And so like, how do we fund, and what is the importance of building new skyscrapers and new downtown centers? I'm not saying that's how I want to live. I am just saying that I think what Frisco is becoming is an example of how people live today. And that goes back to my earlier rant, is that we live more isolated. You can call it part of post-COVID. You can talk about because it's easier to build further out, and because Texas is booming, they'd rather build out than cooperate and build within. And so we're dealing with those consequences. So Frisco's really leaning on saying, hey, why do we have to feel like we need Dallas when, ultimately Dallas needs us, because everyone's coming to Dallas to go to the mall from our neighborhoods. And so we're actually supplying Dallas with the economy than the other way around. And I just think that is a scary conversation, because we all need to have a more honest conversation of how do we want to live. And today, affordable housing, or what's the most affordable house and the biggest house I can get for my money, is what leads that conversation today. And then, like you just said, we forget about all the other stuff. And so we don't have a full, honest calculus of the decision that we're making.
And then if you go to sell your house that you bought out in that sprawly area, it hasn't increased in value. You want to make another decision, then it's like a Ponzi scheme of houses. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I might have shared with you a podcast recently from a pod called Messy Town, where they interviewed a Strong Towns person talking about the housing crisis. And that touches on all of that too. Just that the way neighborhoods are built is not a sustainable way. The growth that we're depending on to pay for growth is not going to pay for growth the way we might think it is when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah, but look at Prosper. I mean, yeah, and look at Denton, look at McKinney, and now people talking about Denison and Decatur. It's the problem with Texas having so much land is that
there's no physical things to stop sprawl.
Yeah.
There's no mountains. There's no big, huge lakes. There's no oceans.
And so it's just it's interesting how it's developing. This kind of continues to my loss. My loss, I actually personally don't feel like it's that big of a loss, because I actually believe it's kind of funny, but FIFA is calling AT&T Stadium in Arlington Dallas Stadium for the FIFA World Cup. I just think that's funny because, again, you talk about the sprawl, but yet at the world level, people know it as Dallas. The only people who call it DFW is people from Fort Worth. People outside of the country don't call it that. People outside of Texas don't call it that. And every time I get home from Dallas-Fort Worth Airport and I have an Uber driver taking me home in Fort Worth.
And you're not taking the train? Is that what you just admitted to?
Yeah, I'm not in Terminal B. They're saying to me, wow, I never go this way. My Uber drivers, more than once, they say, oh, I never go this direction. And I say, what direction do you usually go? Like, oh, I usually go to Frisco or McKinney or Plano. It is, guys, what's happening. And so I just think why I think it's a loss that they're calling it Arlington Stadium, Dallas Stadium, is because it just is an honest assessment of where Fort Worth is as a brand outside of Fort Worth.
Well, I don't think Arlington would agree to have it called Fort Worth Stadium. So
that
even if it was trying to name it
that
after the other big city in the Metroplex, they're definitely not going to do that.
But at least we're in Tarrant County.
Yeah. And Arlington, if Fort Worth is not known nationwide, Arlington is definitely not known nationwide. And we're talking about international sporting event. So people internationally have no idea. Some of them probably don't even know Dallas, but because Dallas was a TV show that was very popular for many years, there is a little bit more recognition with that.
So let's go ahead and move in wins. What is your win for us today?
So my win is that there is an indoor farm that is donating thousands of pounds of salad greens to Fort Worth area food bank. So, sometimes I rant about technology and how technology is not the solution for transportation. But in this case, I'm thinking this is some pretty innovative technology. Eden Green Technology is an indoor farm company based in Cleburne and has expanded its donation program to deliver 10,000 pounds of lettuce a week by partnering with Sharing Excess, a nonprofit organization that addresses food insecurity. And this lettuce is going to go to the food banks such as Tarrant Area Food Bank and Harvest in Mansfield's Food Bank. They have this new partnership that will make it easier to donate the produce, which is amazing because I know that food banks often struggle to have fresh, healthy foods for folks. And so this is an opportunity to not just have food at the food bank that is coming out of a can or a box and might not be the healthiest. So if you pull up the article, you'll see a really cool rendering of the Eden Green Technology Farm. They use a hydroponic system inside of a greenhouse in Cleburne. And like I said, plan to distribute this large amount of lettuce weekly to the food bank. So that's my win. I think that's a cool use of technology. I think trying to grow lettuce in Texas is probably a little challenging. Sometimes it gets a little hot here. The growing season might be short, but if you're using hydroponics, you can grow lettuce all year round.
Yeah, no, I love that. So my win, I'm going to keep it short. It's basically, my win is Dickies, the company. And here's why. I came back from Japan, and Dickies is really big in Japan. So is Carhartt. I believe they're big because where I was in Okinawa, the island, you don't need a big jacket. The biggest jacket you need is like a Carhartt jacket or a Dickies flannel. And so it is really kind of their Patagonia North Face. Like, it is expensive. It's like $80 for a Dickies shirt. And it's expensive. And so me and my wife were like, yo, let's just go to the Dickies outlet downtown to, like, maybe we can see some for our cousins or whatever and maybe ship it over there. I mean, $20, $30 wool jackets. But while I was in there, I just heard the music. I saw the tone and I saw the vibe. And I realized, like, I know I said this a long time ago on the pod, but Fort Worth's brand needs to be more like Dickies than like Cowtown. We need to stop being Cavenders, and we need to start being more like Dickies, because what Dickies represents is, to me, what Fort Worth looks like. Blue collar, proud, durable, reliable. And if you look at Dickies' brand, the oil guys love it, and rural people love it. People of color love it. People, hipsters love it. Skaters love it. It is truly a brand that I think brings everyone together. And so I just think that Dickies should have more of a theme to that. I feel like the Dickies arena is a little too cowboy for me. I wish it would feel more like the store, but I think that's what's really, it truly is a gem of a brand that I think could really get us to where people across the world will know what Fort Worth is. Well, we had one heck of a show today, guys.
I'm going to have to listen to it to catch up and figure out what we actually said.
Yes, we talk fast and we go through a lot because we only get an hour with you. And so, and I know some of you be listening to this on 1.25 and 1.5, and that's even crazier because there's a lot going on here.
I don't know how people do that. That gives me anxiety. I've tried to speed up books on tape and things, and it literally makes my heart feel like it's racing faster. And it's a very uncomfortable feeling for me. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I can't listen. I actually just don't enjoy listening as a whole for stuff. Like, if I listen, it's more for entertainment. I prefer reading because then it gets my full attention and focus.
Yeah, I tend to go off and do other things while listening. And then I realize if I'm really trying to absorb this content, I'm going to need to stop doing this other thing and go back and hear that again because it doesn't sink in. I think this book that I've been reading recently about the administration of Abraham Lincoln, Team of Rivals book, I said to my husband this morning, this is amazing how much this has captured my attention. And I really want to keep listening to it. And I'm not listening to every single detail because they keep talking about, there's so many different names to keep track of. And I tend to be a little ADD, but I'm just the overall concept of it. But I could not listen to it sped up for sure. I have to listen to it on regular speed.
Regardless if you listen to us in regular speed or full speed, we're excited that you listen. We always love to have more people listen, realize we have no We have no ads. We have no, this is not our work. This is true joy. And so we only grow by the people you tell. And Fort Worth is growing, and we like to see our podcast grow as well. So that's been really exciting. And we look forward to having other cool guests on in the future. And as it's election season, we're going to talk more about all what's going on there. And thank you for listening to the pod.
Yeah, really appreciate it. We've been out in the community a lot lately, and it's always nice to have people come up to me and say, we love the pod. We heard you on the pod. So it's nice to get that affirmation from folks, and hopefully they continue to like listening to us.
I love that. All right, everyone, have a good day.
Swipe, dopamine, swipe. Follow us, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, control your life. Dopamine, swipe. Dopamine, swipe. Follow us, like, double tap.